Lucas was 21 years old, a dedicated engineering student at Central University, used to long nights of study and late classes. On that Wednesday, the campus felt unusually quiet, as if time itself had slowed down. The hallways were empty, lit only by the cold glow of street lamps casting long shadows on the walls. He entered room 204, one of the oldest classrooms in the main building, and took his usual seat in the last row. The scent of aged wood mixed with the faint perfume of students filled the air, but something felt off. The atmosphere was thick, almost suffocating. The clock on the wall showed exactly 7:45 p.m., but the ticking sounded strange, muffled and irregular. As the professor began the lecture, Lucas felt a chill run down his spine. The fluorescent lights, which should have evenly lit the room, started flickering, throwing unsettling shadows against the walls. He tried to focus, but the unease only grew. A faint smell of smoke, barely noticeable, crept into his nostrils. Then, everything shifted in an instant. A vision struck him like a flash, the building engulfed in flames, bright orange and red licking windows and doors. The deafening roar of fire mixed with muffled screams of panic. He saw himself and his classmates trapped in that very room, surrounded by spreading smoke, the lights slowly dying out, and the suffocating feeling of no escape. Lucas's heart pounded wildly. He blinked, and the vision vanished, snapping him back to the reality of the intact, calm classroom, but the burnt smell lingered, stronger now, drifting in from the slightly open door. He stood up slowly, his gaze lost in the darkness of the corridor where smoke was beginning to spread. He felt something watching him, an unyielding fate that could not be escaped. He tried to warn the professor and his classmates, but his words felt fragile, unheard amid the surrounding normalcy. The classroom lights flickered once more, and then finally, went out. In the darkness, only the sound of labored breathing and the distant crackling of fire remained. The clock stopped. The silence was deafening. After the lights went out, a heavy silence filled the room. Lucas's breath was shallow, his heart pounding as the faint scent of smoke grew stronger. Panic bubbled just beneath the surface, but his mind raced. He had to get out. He grabbed his backpack, the straps digging into his shoulders, and moved toward the door. The corridor beyond was thick with smoke, curling like ghostly fingers into the hall. Shadows danced on the peeling walls, warped by the flickering emergency lights struggling to stay alive. Ahead, a group of students clustered near the exit, confusion and fear painted across their faces. Among them was Maria, a close friend with sharp eyes and quick thinking, and Jamal, the easygoing jokester who now seemed suddenly serious. "Did you smell that?" Maria asked, her voice tense. "Yeah, smoke," Lucas replied, coughing as the air grew harsher. The fire alarm began to wail somewhere deep in the building, a harsh, grating sound that sent a jolt through everyone. The professor, Mr. Whitman, tried to calm the class, but his words were swallowed by the rising chaos. Lucas took a deep breath and pushed forward, guiding a few of his classmates down the emergency stairs. The stairwell was narrow and dim, the walls smeared with soot. Each step echoed ominously, and the smoke thickened, burning their throats and eyes. At the bottom, they spilled into the open night air. The campus was a maze of darkened buildings and scattered students, some coughing and disoriented, others frantic with worry. Lucas spotted a few others he recognized: Sarah, the quiet literature major, and Ben, a freshman with a contagious nervous energy. Together, they watched as firefighters arrived, their hoses spraying water onto flames licking the edges of the building. News began to spread rapidly. Someone pulled out a phone, and the first social media posts appeared: pictures of the fire, the terrified faces of students escaping, the smoke billowing against the night sky. Yet, as the reality of the event sank in, many brushed off Lucas's warnings about the premonition, dismissing it as stress or coincidence. "You just imagined it," Jamal said with a forced laugh. "The fire's real, but the rest? Come on." But Lucas couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. As the night wore on, he noticed small, unsettling details: missing students, conflicting reports, the eerie silence of the once bustling classrooms. Later, as he lay in bed, restless and unable to sleep, the image of the fire replayed in his mind like a loop. The smoke curling through the halls, the darkness swallowing the light. The sense that death was still lurking just out of sight, waiting. He felt watched. The news continued to cover the story in great detail, revealing discrepancies between official reports and eyewitness accounts. A creeping paranoia settled over Lucas, the feeling that escaping the fire was only the beginning, and that the nightmare was far from over. Days had passed since the fire, but the shadow it cast over the survivors lingered, heavy and suffocating. Lucas tried to convince himself that the nightmare was behind them, but a gnawing unease had settled deep inside his chest. Something was wrong. Among the survivors was Sarah, the quiet literature major. She had seemed fragile but determined the night of the fire, clutching her bag as they escaped into the cold air. Lucas had shared a brief, uneasy conversation with her afterwards. Both of them avoiding the subject of the vision, the premonition that still haunted his thoughts. Then the news came. Sarah was found dead in her apartment, an accident the police described as tragic and unlikely. She had fallen down the narrow stairs in her building, a place she knew well. The neighbors spoke of hearing a loud crash late at night, followed by an eerie silence. Lucas was numb when he heard the news. The weight of it crushed him, a dreadful confirmation of the dark pattern emerging. He remembered the strange way Sarah had moved during the fire, her sudden hesitation near the stairwell, the flicker of fear in her eyes. Could it be that the danger hadn't ended with their escape? That death was still hunting them, invisible and inevitable. His phone buzzed with messages. Jamal, trying to lighten the mood, sent a joke about the curse they all joked about at first. But even Jamal's laughter seemed forced, hollow. Others began to whisper, theories about fate, curses, and death's cruel design. Lucas reached out to Maria, his friend and anchor in the chaos. She listened quietly as he described the vision and Sarah's death. Maybe it's just coincidence, Maria said, her voice uncertain but hopeful. We can't let fear control us. But Lucas knew better. He could feel it in his bones, the cycle had begun. Late at night, memories of the fire merged with nightmares. He saw the chain of events unfolding like a dark domino line, the fire, their escape, Sarah's death. The pieces fit together too neatly to be random. A chilling thought gripped him, who would be next? The group's dynamic shifted. Some refused to believe the pattern, brushing it off as paranoia. Others grew withdrawn, their eyes shadowed with fear. Lucas found himself watching his friends closely, noting small details. A stumble here, a distracted glance there. He tried to warn them, but the words felt powerless against the invisible force closing in. As the sun set on another restless day, Lucas's mind raced. He felt trapped in a cruel game where the rules were written by death itself, a game he desperately wanted to escape, but didn't know how. The clock ticked on. And the silence was growing louder. Lucas sat alone in his small apartment, the flickering light of his desk lamp casting long shadows across the scattered papers and half-empty coffee cups. The silence was heavy, broken only by the soft hum of the city outside and the steady ticking of the old clock on the wall. He was obsessed with the sequence. Since Sarah's death, he had begun to piece together the timeline of events, searching desperately for a pattern that might explain the invisible thread pulling at their lives. Each detail mattered. The times, the places, the faces, everything fit together in a grim puzzle. The fire had been the beginning, the catalyst. Sarah's death was the second piece falling into place. But there was more. He scoured news reports, social media posts, and police records. There were rumors, whispered accounts of near misses, accidents narrowly avoided, strange occurrences no one could explain. Lucas created a list, marking dates and times, noting every survivor's movements since the fire. A pattern emerged, one that chilled him to the bone. Someone was next. He couldn't say who, but the signs were unmistakable. A friend's careless stumble, a glance that lingered too long on a passing car, a sudden chill in the air. He tried to warn them, to shake them from their denial. "We have to be careful," he told Maria over the phone. "This isn't random. There's a sequence, a pattern." But the fear in her voice was tinged with skepticism. "Lucas, you're letting this consume you. We survived the fire. That should be enough." But Lucas knew better. The nightmare wasn't over. One evening, he arrived at the cafe where some of the survivors often met. The room buzzed with quiet conversations, but beneath the surface was an undercurrent of unease. Jamal was there, his usual humor replaced by a tense silence. "I don't want to believe it," he said, glancing around nervously. "But things don't add up." Lucas nodded. "The deaths, the accidents, it's all connected. We can't run from it." They made a plan to watch each other, to call if anything felt off. But the tension was suffocating. Every sound, a creak, a distant siren, set their nerves on edge. One night, Lucas received a call from Maria, her voice shaking. "It's happened again," he rushed over, heart pounding. Another survivor was gone, lost to a freak accident no one could explain. Lucas felt the weight of inevitability crushing down. The pattern was real. Death was stalking them, relentless and patient. No matter what they tried, it seemed impossible to escape. And with each passing day, the silence grew deeper, louder than any scream. The days blurred into nights as Lucas and the remaining survivors sank deeper into their grim reality. The pattern of death loomed over them like a shadow, growing darker and more oppressive with each passing hour. Determined to fight back, Lucas gathered everyone at Maria's apartment, a small, cluttered space filled with books, maps, and old newspapers pinned to the walls. It was their war room, a place to search for answers, to find a way out of the nightmare. "We need to understand this," Lucas said, his voice steady but urgent. "If death is following a pattern, we have to break it." They pored over every detail, news reports, accident records, even ancient folklore they found online about curses and fate. Jamal, always skeptical, dug through archives, looking for anything that matched their experience. "Look at this," Maria said, pointing to a faded newspaper clipping. "There are stories from decades ago. Similar incidents, survivors who escaped disasters only to meet strange ends soon after." Lucas nodded. "It's a cycle. Something beyond chance. They tried everything, changing routines, swapping schedules, avoiding places they felt drawn to. Some attempts seemed to delay the inevitable, moments of false hope in a relentless chase. But the weight of fear was suffocating. Every phone call, every knock on the door sent a jolt through their nerves. Trust was fragile, and paranoia crept in. One evening, Lucas sat alone, reviewing the timeline again. A nagging question gnawed at him: was it possible to outrun death by changing the order, by jumping the line? Or was the fate sealed, no matter what they did? His phone buzzed. It was Maria. "It happened," she whispered. "Another one, gone." The room spun as Lucas felt the crushing truth settle in. Their efforts had bought time, but not safety. The survivors were dwindling. Lucas clenched his fists. They were running out of time. The race wasn't just against death, it was against despair itself. The silence grew louder, filled with the sound of ticking clocks and distant echoes of footsteps they could not see. And in the shadows, the cycle waited patiently to close. The city felt quieter. As if it, too, knew something had ended. Lucas walked the streets with eyes that hadn't seen sleep in days. The familiar faces had vanished, one by one, taken by improbable accidents that felt meticulously orchestrated by an invisible hand. Now, only he remained, and Jamal. They met in an abandoned subway station, far from the usual places, hiding like rats in a maze whose walls kept shifting. "We're the last ones," Jamal said, eyes fixed on the shadows flickering under the faint light. Lucas nodded slowly. It wasn't coincidence. Everything happened exactly as in the vision. In the same order. Even those who doubted, were taken. "So now what?" Jamal asked. "We just wait." Lucas opened a worn folder. Inside, notes, newspaper clippings, voice recordings, everything they had gathered over the past few weeks. He pointed to a pattern he had drawn. A reversed spiral, filled with names, dates, and an empty center. "If it's all a cycle," Lucas said, "maybe we can break it by going back to where it started." Jamal frowned. "The college?" Lucas nodded. "The classroom. The last class." It was a desperate plan, almost suicidal. But when the world feels like it's chasing you, even the impossible starts to make sense. That same night, they broke into the old university building, now sealed off with caution tape and cracked concrete. Room 306 was still standing, almost. The smell of smoke still lingered, as if time had frozen there. "Do you remember what you saw?" Jamal asked quietly. Lucas closed his eyes. The smoke crawling along the walls. The lights failing. Muffled screams. That final snap before the silence. They positioned the chairs in the exact spots they had sat during that last class. Recreated every detail. If death had a plan, maybe it also had a weak spot. Time passed slowly. Minutes felt like hours. A metallic noise echoed down the hallway. Then, footsteps. "Lucas?" Jamal whispered. But Lucas didn't answer. He was staring at the ceiling, where a crack had begun to open, slow, like an eye revealing itself. "Leave," Lucas said, trembling. "You shouldn't be here." "And leave you alone?" Lucas gave a bitter smile. "Maybe I was always the last one on the list." An electrical snap tore through the silence. The lights went out. Complete darkness. Silence. And then, a scream. After that, only the sound of wind blowing through a broken window. The next morning, only one body was found in the building. Jamal. Lucas had vanished. Or escaped. Or, been spared. For now. Lucas lived under a new name. In a new city. Far from the university, the fire, the friends, and the vision. He now worked the night shift at a 24-hour bookstore. A quiet, forgotten place on the edge of town. Perfect for disappearing. The shelves smelled of old paper, and the sound of rain tapping the roof was his only constant company. Sometimes, he lost track of time. Other times, he heard voices where there should be none. But Lucas was alive. And that, he thought, was a victory. One night, while organizing philosophy books, he heard a click. Small. Dry. He looked up. A ceiling light flickered twice. Then a third time. Then went dark. The aisle fell into shadow. He kept walking, trying to ignore the tightening feeling in his chest. But the signs kept coming. A wall clock had stopped. Exactly at 9:06 p.m., the same time as his vision. A book fell from the shelf by itself. The title read, "The End of All Things." The front desk phone rang. Once. Twice. 3 times. When he picked up. Nothing. Just static. Lucas closed the store early that night. The sky was clear, but the air felt heavy, like the moment before a storm. He walked home quickly, trying to convince himself it was just paranoia. But as he placed his key in the lock, he froze. The door was already open. Inside, everything looked normal. Except for one thing. In the center of the room, on the table, lay an object he instantly recognized. An old university ID badge. His. Burned in the fire. He stepped closer. The floor creaked strangely beneath him, as if no longer anchored to reality. When he touched the badge, a sudden gust of wind swept through the room, though all the windows were shut. And then, silence. Absolute. The next morning, neighbors reported hearing a sharp sound, like glass shattering, followed by complete stillness. Police found the apartment empty. No signs of forced entry. No evidence of a struggle. But in the corner of the room, marked in soot on the floor, was a spiral symbol. In the center of the spiral, a handwritten message: "No one escapes forever." And so, the silence took over. The patient and cruel fate had finally completed its cycle.